Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this event today, run by IIBA and Capco on business design and excellence. I'm sure we'll have a fantastic session, but before we do, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Elaine McCartney. I'm chair of the IIBA Scotland branch. For those of you not familiar with IIBA, it's the International Institute of Business Analysis, and the UK chapter is dedicated to supporting and growing the BA community in the UK. As you can see for the details here, we have made up of volunteers. We've got around 50 and we're spread across the whole of the UK. We organise events such as this and networking, professional development and mentorship. So if you are interested in volunteering, please do reach out to us on LinkedIn. So back to the session today, I'd like to introduce our presenters, Johnny, John, Adrien and Stefan. Please do put all your questions into the Q&A and they will answer as many as they can in the time available. So please enjoy and I'll hand over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Elaine. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are geographically. And what a pleasure it is to be back with the IIBA today to deliver the latest in our webinar series on all things business analysis. As you can see from the screen, today's webinar is all about business design and excellence, bringing together business architecture, analysis and process. Firstly, a big thank you to Elaine, Adrien and all of the volunteers at the IIBA UK chapter for welcoming us back again. It's been great to see the chapter go from strength to strength with such a vibrant community of late. So before we get into today's content, a brief intro to me and to Capco. I'm Jonathan Molan, a principal consultant at Capco and partnerships lead for our Scotland and North team. Throughout my time at Capco, I've held a variety of business analysis related roles, so it's safe to say that I've got a bit of a soft spot or fondness for this important discipline in the world of change and transformation. I'll be moderating today's session and facilitating the Q&A at the end. As Elaine already noted, we're really keen to get as much engagement and questions as possible. So please do use the chat functionality. We'd love to hear from you, whether that be questions, feedback or insights. Our speakers today bring today over 50 years of combined experience in the field and plenty of rich insight. I'll let John, Adrien and Stefan introduce themselves in a moment. But before that, a brief overview on Capco for those of you that don't know us already. So we are a global technology and management consultancy specializing in the financial services and energy sectors. We've got over 8,000 consultants globally and 100 plus clients. We bring deep domain expertise and dedicated subject matter knowledge with extensive capability across the likes of data and analytics, technology, engineering, and core business consulting. In the UK, we've got offices in London, Manchester, Edinburgh, and Glasgow, with approximately 1,700 consultants on these shores. And we are multi-award winning, recently named the Consultancy of the Year at the British Bank Awards. We're also proud advanced level partners with the IIBA, regularly producing thought leadership and delivering events such as this one today, whilst investing in our people's professional development by offering an extensive learning and development curriculum internally, as well as external certifications such as those offered through the IIBA partnership. So that's it from me for now. As mentioned, I'll hand over to John to take us through the agenda, and you'll hear from me again when we get to the Q&A. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Johnny. Hey, everybody. So today we're going to talk you through a number of things that relate to the relationship between business architecture, business analysis and process. We'll touch on what that means in the first section. We'll then share some of our experience on how we combine those disciplines and professions before going on to talk about the benefits and the challenges of doing so. And as Johnny mentioned, there'll be some Q&A time towards the end as well. We'll be more than happy to take your questions. So think about them as we go through. So I really want to invite you to join us today for a connected approach to business design and excellence, which enables organisations that we work with to move confidently from strategy to execution, ensuring clarity, direction, quality of delivery, and continuous improvement. Today's session is going to explore how we at Capco and business architecture, business analysis process combine as part of our integrated business consulting capability. And this helps us drive meaningful and measurable change. We draw on our experience and our examples today from the financial services consultancy and the expertise of Stefan, Adrien, and myself. And just to introduce myself, obviously my name is John Wisner, as you can see. I'm a managing principal. I lead the BA and process capability in the UK. I've also been nominated in the past for IBA or BA of the Year in 2022. I speak quite regularly at different conferences, and I'm pleased to say I host my own podcast on the topic of business analysis, such as my enjoyment of the topic. I'll introduce Adrien.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here, and thanks for welcoming us. My name is Adrien. I'm an experienced business architect. I've been worked on business architecture projects over the past 5 years in a dedicated fashion. I've spent a lot of time into banking mostly, working in credit and lending, sustainability, and recently a bit more insurance, through various maturity levels of business architecture. So from initiating business architecture up till kind of handing it back up to our clients and having a very mature state that helps defining all of the transformation required. I'll pause there. Stefan, I'll hand over to you for an introduction as well.
Thanks, Adrien. Yeah, so hi everyone. My name's Stefan MacGregor. I'm a senior consultant at Capco. Been there for about 5.5 years. But really started off my journey getting into lean, continuous improvement, process excellence as part of a lean coach in telecoms. And from then on, yeah, never looked back, went into retail banking, a few other industries, and now with Capco Consulting. So I'm very excited to talk to you guys today. And in fact, for our first section, we're going to provide a brief introduction to each one of our disciplines, including their key areas of focus, as well as some associated tools and techniques. So we'll hand over to Adrien.
Thanks, Stefan. Exactly to the point. Now, this is literally the introduction of what we're looking to talk about. I'll be mostly talking about business architecture, given my background, and to give you an introduction of what business architecture is. It's literally trying to translate strategy into operations, and the way we do that is typically through blueprints, whether it's capability blueprints or service blueprints, but even kind of sometimes translating that further into customer journeys, roles and responsibilities, and really to articulate what the organization does, how it creates value, and where the change is required. John, I think you're the next.
Indeed. So from a business analysis perspective, as I'm sure many of you will appreciate already, amongst other things, it enables change by defining needs and recommending solutions that deliver real value for our stakeholders. Business analysis is very much the bridge between strategy and execution, and as part of it, we elicit and analyse, manage requirements, information, understanding and knowledge to ensure that the solutions we build align to our business objectives. Many of the components that we deal with are listed here. I'm not going to read all of them, but I'm sure you'll hear me talk about requirements, process, and many other aspects throughout this session.
And from a process excellence point of view, it's not just process maps, although that's a big part of it. I see process excellence as a system of tools and approaches applied at the execution level of an organisation. So we're thinking about who does what and how do they do it. And we want to focus on achieving some main outcomes, which are removing waste and non-value add activity, and ensure process consistency and improving control over expected outcomes of the process. Now, how we do that is, yeah, there's a lot of components and kind of tools that go into this. and I'll talk to you a little bit more about them in detail later on in this section. Pass you over to Adrien just now for the link to strategy.
As these introduction points out, each of these disciplines do kind of tie back to strategy, but usually not for looking for the exact same thing. Strategy remains kind of the central point out of which everything needs to come. Business architecture will look at it from a North Star perspective, and we'll look to translate that into value streams, operating models, and usually often also help with KPIs or OKRs in many cases. From a business analysis standpoint, that's probably more looking at it from business outcomes. And tying that back into requirements, ensuring that everything is linked back to what the outcomes is required to be. And from a business process excellence, it's usually looking at performance standards, products, customer promises, anything that will look to become champion in, or anything that the firm would look into become championing in. So the translation of a strategy into this is usually quite different, but each of the different discipline can help each other in kind of translating that. Business architecture typically would use strategy into defining the operating model through, as I mentioned previously, capability-centric or capability maps or service blueprints in order to define at the highest level how your business on a holistic level will be operating. Now, the benefits of that is literally that it usually avoids kind of gap in further detailed design. It allows also to identify interdependencies between different groups of people's teams or even projects. And it usually then allows for a more holistic definition of your target operating model, which typically goes one level down. And this is already where the kind of blurred lines start to occur of how each of the discipline kind of segments and remain separate from each other. I think what we've seen on the field is that in order to bring tangible value, there is a need usually to cross over, and whether that is business architecture crossing over into business analysis or business analysis crossing over into business architecture doesn't really matter, but the reality is it often does. I think we can move to the next slide as well, please. Now, business architecture on a by the book level, I would say, is developed through four core dimensions and 6 kind of extended dimensions. Now, the 4 core dimensions, as I mentioned first, was value streams, capabilities, organization, which usually refers to either team structure or usually often processes, and information. Data becomes more and more central to any design nowadays, and in understanding how that data is going to flow, what kind of how that information is going to go from one point to another throughout the value stream is critical to defining business models that work in today's world. The 6 kind of then extended dimensions that we build on are stakeholders, product strategies, metrics, very importantly, policies, and finally initiatives. I'll pick 2 out of those. Metrics, one be a key one, where defining KPIs and OKRs and linking that back into delivery is critical in today's world in order to ensure success. And there's often projects not working well because of that disconnect or a disconnection between delivery teams not necessarily understanding what the outcome has to be. So really tying that back between your strategy, your business architecture, and then handing it over into business analysis makes it very powerful for teams to really work on. And initiatives is the final output that typically comes out of business architecture. Once we define where we need to go, it's a matter of breaking that down into chunks, bits of work packages, or initiatives and handing that back into dedicated teams to define that into further detail. But usually, again, that allows for a holistic definition of the target state, a holistic way of looking at transformation, avoiding any kind of gaps in design, and ensuring that there is interdependencies that are understood by all teams. We can go to the next slide, where I think I hand over to John.
That's right. Thanks, Adrien. And really, complementing business architecture, which is often feeds in it informs really the business analysis, as well as projects and programs and BAU initiatives as well. Business analysis covers many different activities and approaches, and as we'll see later on, within our service catalogue, it represents the things that all of us do at Capco as business analysts. So that may be from current state analysis and really understanding what actors and teams do in a given process, understanding the issues and opportunities there are to improve those processes, and really getting closer to the business, the organisation, and the stakeholders we work with. Many of that early insight that we get from processes needs to be built on further from investigation and root cause, to ultimately allow us to maybe describe and define requirements that we would have elicited. Thinking all the time as well about traceability and how, just in the few simple examples I've mentioned of process and requirements, and back to even the scope of the project, how these things combine. So these are often things that we're thinking about as part of our analysis planning, as we consider our approach as well. There's a lot of ideas that come out of business analysis as well, and many of those need to be qualified and quantified, and often we find that individual business cases for propositions are developed by business analysts and taken further. Beyond that, there's a number of other things you might recognise. I'm not going to read all of these, but whether you're a BA working on functionality and applications or data, or indeed working with a business, there's a whole variety of activities that we get involved in as business analysts, depending on the project initiative or even the business architecture direction.
And then, so I mentioned a process excellence system previously. So what I'd like to do is just kind of distill that into 3 distinct key themes to help explain a little bit more in detail about what we look at from a process excellence point of view. So if we look at the first theme here, understanding the landscape. So this could include, linking back up to the business architecture capabilities, the values, really understanding how that breaks down into process families or structures across the organisation. We could also look at how, are there any standards? So from a point of view of documentation, whether that's processes or even down to the procedure level, as well as how those processes are measured. So what are the metrics, what are the measurements? And then related to that, so do we know how processes are performing against expectations? And even step further back, do we understand what those expectations are? So if we don't, then one of the kind of key aspects of process excellence is really to understand, elicit, and really gather customer and business sentiment around about the processes and work out what those kind of key data points should be. And moving on to the second theme, so optimizing processes. So that's really where the bulk of the analysis happens. So it's where we like to use methodologies such as Lean to provide the guiding principles, and also the expansive toolkit they provide to identify and tackle issues within a process. But then also beyond that, so process excellence is I think is seen as a scientific method for driving improvements. So therefore, if you have a data-led, structured approaches to define, improve, or disprove hypotheses, it's essential to have something to point to. So if we have, for example, like Lean or DMAIC to follow, this enables us to demonstrate that thread between the overall strategy, the initial identification, to your solution, and then controlling that solution. And then thirdly, maintaining improvements. So this is really where hard data and soft skills and culture side of process excellence combine. So hard side of things will, for example, like monitoring and tracking the right metrics, ensure our new processes that we've updated and changed, they remain delivering as we expect. But also on the softer side of things, ensuring we support the people where the value is delivered. So basically the people that operate the process every day. We want them to be able to be self-sufficient with regards to continuous improvement, really building a culture and sustaining and building the momentum started from that first improvement activity that we kicked off. So if a process excellence expert has done themselves out of a job, then they've succeeded, in my opinion.
Now we're going to talk about how we combine business architecture, analysis, and process excellence. And certainly, just thinking about the connection between business analysis and process alone, that's something that's very closely connected, as we'll see. And lots of our business analysts are doing some excellent work in the process field, and vice versa. Those in process are quite often employing business analysis approaches. And then beyond that, we have many of our individuals as well will also branch into business architecture type concepts, as we'll hear. So the way that we're going to describe how business architecture, business analysis, and process excellence come together is actually through an example. And that particular example, hopefully we picked a fairly simple one, is really just lending. I'm sure most of us have probably been involved in lending at some stage, whether it's as a borrower or working with organisations that might lend. But if we think about an example where a bank is trying to lend, has a lending capability, and that lending capability is underperforming, and the underperformance results in long approval times and customer drop-off rates. Essentially, it means customers who want loans not really getting their loan in a timely fashion and going elsewhere. So we think about that as an example. Now we can apply business architecture, business analysis, and process to that lens to bring it to life, how we combine those three disciplines and professions. And we'll start with business architecture.
And in business architecture's case, credit as such is a value stream. There's sub-value streams that can be defined as well. But importantly, defining the value stream end to end is what brings a lot of value. So starting from your origination down to your credit assessment, approval, limit loading and drawdown, and into post-monitoring as well, and servicing. This then allows to break this further down into capabilities. So talk about credit risk management, customer onboarding. There could be other capabilities such as financial spreading, limit loading and drawdown, loan servicing. And finally, further down the line, hopefully this allows, once there is an end-to-end view of the value stream, this allows to kind of define what kind of key transformation initiatives are required in order to improve and get to the strategic end state.
And then building on that, from a business analysis perspective, I will often build the detailed current state process, understand the real issues that relate to that, the scope of the transformation initiatives and the capabilities that Adrien described. We'll think as well, what opportunities there are to improve the processes we're working with across the value stream. And this will mean, in our example, maybe relieving bottlenecks that are due to manual document checks and duplicated data entry that would otherwise, without them, our lending process might be a bit quicker. I'll also work with stakeholders and really understand their requirements, defining them in a clear, prioritised way that aligns to the North Star, the vision, if you like, of the business architecture. And one example might be, automated client onboarding, KYC, and credit scoring, which means, and all of that through an integrated customer portal, which allows straight-through processing for the lower risk loans, essentially meaning there's not that need for elongated manual interaction. I'll also then work with the delivery teams, the technology teams as an example, to identify and appraise the appropriate design solutions. I'll work closely in doing so with the business to appraise the options. And these might be off-the-shelf options, custom builds, or enhancements to what we've got already.
And then from a process excellence point of view, so my focus is really understanding about how the process is currently performing, what measures are vital and what's important to the client, and really understanding what are these approval times, what feeds into that, as well as the high drop-off rates. We then analyze the process steps, and so for this example, we could use some waste walks to identify non-value add activity, understand where manual activity is slowing up the process and leading to that long approval time, and then also identify inefficient or ineffective process controls that are really choking the process and reducing the ability to go straight through and provide somebody who's a good candidate with the money they need. So we would suggest the changes, work with business analysts to really start to develop those concepts out, and then at the other end want to quantify the impact those improvements have made and understand and monitor the ongoing performance and ensure those controls are working as we expect.
Stefan. Now, one thing we would clarify as well is that these are all distinct roles that any individual could perform. So quite often we were a single individual performing these analysis activities, the process excellence activities that Stefan has just outlined, as well as, you know, considering some of the business architecture components as well. So it's just worth recognising that. We're now going to talk about how we connect business architecture, business analysis, and process, again, thinking about our lending example, but this time thinking about some very specific techniques that we might employ to combine the three disciplines we've been talking about.
Yes, the first one, and it's exactly where the power lies, really. I think connecting the dots and connecting those different deliverables is where a lot of value can be created. From a business architecture standpoint, we would, for example, use value stream mapping and also touch upon customer experience in that space, linking that back into requirement traceability and then back into what business process excellence would look at, CPOC, which is your suppliers, your inputs, your outputs per stage, allows really to align everything and use the three disciplines to create a lot of value. That's just one example. John, I think we've got another one. Yeah,
exactly. Sorry, John. Capability mapping. This informs the scope of our process, and then the actual mapping itself determines an agreed view of the process by those that complete on a daily basis. And then mining that data, so leveraging process mining technology that can validate or challenge that design, where then we can feed back up the way and really start to get a fully bottomed out view of the process that aligns to the correct scope.
And a third example of how we use many of the techniques, or some techniques, to combine the three is, you know, how first and foremost from a business architecture perspective, Adrien might design the roles and responsibilities of the organisation. From a business analysis perspective, as we explore our stakeholders and we start to think about, you know, either who's responsible for the processes we define, or indeed who's going to be responsible for or consulted or even informed as to you know, some of those solution designs and changes and requirements and activities that we perform as business analysts. That structure around knowing who our stakeholders are, knowing why they're important, knowing which instances and activities we work with them on is extremely important, both for the analysis, for the projects, but beyond as well. And then we'll apply techniques such as DMAIC and root cause to systematically analyse controls and improvements. And I should add, you know, these are just some of the techniques we employ just to combine the disciplines. There are many, many more techniques we use as well. I should talk as well a little bit about our service catalogue, because this really, on a single page, just shows how we combine, you know, many of the good things that Adrien's talked about from business architecture, as well as process, and then combining that with business analysis as well. And if you like, you know, these services are really, you know, our sort of our shopping cart of options that we can use to combine to deliver value to our customers and clients and stakeholders we work with. On any given engagement, we quite often combine a number of these services into one seamless delivery. But it just shows, I think, for me, you know, the breadth of the business analysis role that it really can cover, as well as the business architecture role as well. And one final thing to talk about when we talk about the combination of process and business architecture and BA is it's worth recognising the correlation between, you know, this joined up combined approach with perhaps how some of you and some of us certainly work when it comes to scaled agile frameworks, you know, because within a scaled agile framework, it's quite often, you know, the business architect is probably most directly aligned to the portfolio level considerations, translating strategy into operations, really defining the what and the why. Whereas the business process individual is probably is thinking about, you know, the program solution level, coordinating across teams to a certain extent, and really thinking about how value flows across the value stream, across the process. Whereas maybe an individual BA or a BA assigned to an individual team we'll start to translate those needs into change and think about requirements and epics and traceability, as we've mentioned before. So it's definitely something to consider, that actually whether it's in a waterfall environment, an agile environment, a safe environment, or a hybrid environment, there is plenty of room for collaboration and combination of these three activities.
Okay, so now we're going to look at the benefits of combining our disciplines, but first we're going to flip that on its head and actually understand what the effects are of not properly aligning these with each other. So if we look at these first two examples here, so limited continuous improvement and silo processes. So I think these are two good examples where short-term changes that are made in one area of the business, but not communicated or shared or aligned with each other, and up and down the different levels, that might prove a short-term gain for one, but really it's a detrimental effect over the long term for the wider system.
So from a business architecture perspective, there's usually the risk of a lack of a strategic alignment, and also underperforming change portfolios. Typically, what it comes out to is also technical debt being incurred, change being done whilst actually not really being strategic, and there's always a risk, projects don't meet deadlines, or if they actually fail to move KPIs. So combining those three disciplines is actually very valuable. John, over to you.
Thank you. And from a business analysis perspective, amongst many other effects, lost traceability is definitely one. No clear connection and linkage between the strategic objectives, requirements, process outcomes, and of course the solutions and tests that need to be done as well. On top of that, the whole process of change becomes inefficient. Where requirements might be reworked, duplicated, they're misaligned across teams. So combining all of the three disciplines really helps us do that. And if we look at that lending example again, by product teams building overlapping solutions due to unclear ownership and capabilities, that might be another effect as a specific example. But we've talked about the effects really of not aligning business architecture, business analysis, and process. So now we're going to talk about actually some of the benefits of aligning the three.
And there are many, again, so it's a matter of summarizing some of those. We picked up pretty much 6 of them. Strategic alignment being the first one that comes to mind, especially from a business architecture perspective. It's ensuring that all of your transformation initiatives kind of support one single North Star view and all work together in unison in order to deliver that value. There's usually a risk for kind of siloed initiatives, and as we mentioned, just work gone to waste because of a lack of that alignment. Customer centricity is always clear and important. Just to say it's important, it's crucial, but it's often set aside. And by kind of empowering that holistic view, but also working all together with that holistic view, we ensure better value provided to the clients and to the customer ultimately. There's a feedback loops around continuous learning and improvements, ensuring that people working on the detail level can always feed that back into the higher level and validate some of the kind of maybe higher level design is crucial. Agility is natural and allows, again, to review design, but also kind of reorganize and pivot staff and effort into ensuring that we deliver value as quick and as efficient as possible. And finally, end-to-end visibility and operational efficiencies. I'll go ahead, John. I think the essence is just that there's a need for clear traceability between strategy to requirements and to process execution, and operational efficiency is ensured by working within three disciplines altogether. Over to you.
Thanks, Adrien. And we'll now talk about the challenges of combining business architecture, business analysis, and process excellence, not least the challenge of me clicking the button at the right time on PowerPoint.
So business architecture, one of the challenges we've seen specifically is around siloed practices and ownership. Usually the way we kind of overcome those is really by establishing a shared operating model, a shared kind of business architecture that can be referred to. I worked previously and we worked through master journeys, and that allowed everybody to understand how that was working end to end. And also defining clear ownership across the life cycle, have dedicated business architects, but also dedicated teams and resources and BAs working, and tech BAs working all together on a single piece of work in order to ensure that there is common work and understanding. Different languages and models is also a very tricky part. And capability, like defining the capabilities, process, functions, setting a common understanding and setting that kind of terminology is something business architecture usually helps with, and provides that kind of common taxonomy.
From a business analysis perspective, or actually from a broader perspective, another challenge is completing priorities and metrics with each area or team within the organisation, perhaps measuring success differently. This is overcome by implementing enterprise-wide and level KPIs that measure the end-to-end outcomes. That includes the value, maturity, and customer effort. And beyond that, we also think about combining and fragmentation of data and tooling as well. With many of the artifacts produced across business architecture, business analysis, and process, producing themselves many artifacts and using key points of data spread across many systems. We overcome this by really introducing integrated repositories, digitized process mapping, using tools, inventories, and linking capabilities, requirements, and processes together. And actually, before we move on to some of the others that Stefan's going to share, I just want to forewarn you that there will be an upcoming QA, so to maybe think of some of the challenges that affect you as well.
And if we look at cultural resistance, so culture becoming one of the most difficult things to tackle, and just as ops and frontline teams are resistant to changing the way they work, so can transformation teams themselves. So this cultural mindset challenge that can be addressed in a practical way. So, for example, setting up multidisciplinary teams to encourage greater collaboration between the different disciplines, different roles, but also have a real focus on reward and recognition for achieving those shared goals, and really celebrating when you recognise that you've worked together to address an issue or complete a piece of work. And then similarly, limited skills crossover, so multidisciplinary teams will also benefit from greater exposure to each other. And then you can also just formalise that through cross-training to raise your skills and knowledge across the team, and really start to build high-performing roles that can work as hybrids.
Thanks, Stefan. And really, that concludes the detail that we were going to share in terms of how we combine business architecture, business analysis, and process. But we definitely encourage you to come and visit us at Capco. We've got success stories relating to business analysis and process and architecture. There's thought leadership as well. We've got a few examples on the screen. So we definitely encourage you to come along and visit us and see what we've got to share that relates to challenges and situations similar to your own. I'd also like to take the opportunity as well to invite some of you or all of you to join me on YouTube or on podcast, on Spotify, to come and listen each week as I present a BA-focused BA Insights podcast, where I have a host of guests talking about our favourite topics that we've covered today. And you might see a few familiar faces from the audience that we've got today, or from those presenting today. I think that one last thing to talk about from a Capco perspective as well, there's further insights, tools, approaches that we use to shape the future of business analysis. So again, they're all available from capco.com. Come along, visit us. I did mention at the start, and I think Johnny did as well, that there would be a QA. I think we gave a few warnings along the way as well to think about some of your questions and challenges. So now's a good time to hand over to Johnny to compare and we'll happily take your questions and try and give you some answers.
Yes, we'll make sure that you guys remain on your toes, John, Stefan, Adrien. And before we get into the Q&A, a big thank you. That was really, really rich insight and lots to take away, I'm sure, for those on the call to their day-to-day. So just on the topic of the Capco.com website, we have had a number of questions around opportunities at Capco. So I would encourage you to search Capco Careers in your browser, or you can go to the Capco.com website where we've got a careers section. Number of opportunities across the UK, but also in APAC, in North America, and elsewhere in Europe. So do use that function there and explore what opportunities we have available. Okay, so let's get into it. And I see, John, you've already got some people subscribing for the podcast, so that is good. You'll see your YouTube numbers going up, and you'll get one of those awards that they give for 10,000 subscribers or so. So first question for you, Adrien, if that is okay. Business architecture related. Where does business architecture stop and business analysis begin? And does it really matter?
That's a fantastic question. Does it really matter? Well, I personally don't think so, but that's maybe an unpopular opinion. I think where business architecture, there's two ways of looking at it. There's the by the book definition, and there's a kind of more practical ways. And from my experience, we practically usually overlap, and that's what I mentioned earlier on in the presentation. And where we overlap is around the process. Now, business architecture by the book doesn't really go into process level, even at the highest level. And from experience, what we've seen is that the added value to clients, to people, to just teams, generally speaking, is if you don't start from your process and if you don't go into your process, just articulating capabilities and services like holistically, usually lacks a little bit of value, and there comes a point where people question how is that actually going to work together. Whilst once you bring it together into a process, even at the highest level, even very helicopter view, and I mentioned we did like master journeys, for example, which was an end-to-end journey on credit and lending and on sustainability as well, defining all of the kind of key stages that was going on through the value chain and through the kind of end-to-end process. That helped at least teams, some of them questioning what the details of them would be, but at least it helped everyone get a common understanding of what that end-to-end process would look like. We added some flavors on top of roles and responsibilities, and then IT at the high level, not necessarily calling out the tools, but at least then calling out what we expected the tools to be able to do, such as a document repository tool or a credit risk rating tool or something like that. So you don't have to call out which specific provider would be doing that, but at least giving a flavor of which tools would be using across the end-to-end. That usually can be something that is done equally on a business analysis level. It's not something that business architecture typically looks into. If you look at by the book, you'd stick at your kind of service levels, capabilities, and then pass it on and collaborate at least with business analysis and with process excellence as well to look into how can we define something that is top of the game and absolutely more efficient. And that's why I think the answer lies into combining those different disciplines, right? That's where the actual value lies, and that's where we can really work together. And there's a natural way of working together as well. So.
Yeah, it really speaks, I think, to the intersection, like you say, between the discipline, between the capabilities, and the need to bring the clients or the kind of business on the journey to help them understand that more broadly. Very good, thank you, Adrien. Stefan, I think we'll come to you next, if that's okay. So how can business process excellence stay relevant in a world of AI and automation? Won't we end up having the tools do it for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think very topical. I think listen, I think my thoughts on that are, I think those tools are there to be leveraged, to lean right into them, for example. And Capco for example, is a people business, but yet we are still big proponents of AI and utilizing technology where it's most appropriate. And I think there's a real value in using those kind of tools to accelerate the kind of delivery that that we were looking to get through my process excellence or a BA or even a business architecture point of view. But the real value for me is there's usually a human element to that, and whether that's people working on the process or a customer at the end of it, the value of a process excellence approach, can really look to start to interrogate why things happen. And I think that's maybe where the gap is between the technology, at least at the moment anyway, before they can start thinking for themselves. But from a right now point of view, then yeah, the ability to look at the process, keep asking why, keep asking sometimes daft questions to understand why, and really understand why things are done, because a lot of the time it's not just a pure black and white, hard and fast decision why a process is done one way or another. People have got there's feelings and ways of doing things and resistance to change. So that's that's a very human element. And again, even if there's very little human involvement in the process, from a customer point of view, if they, what they want from the process might change. People are fickle, so their expectations definitely will change throughout time. And having those tools to leverage and understand, to give us the hard data to understand what those reasons might point towards, it, I think, will still need people to be able to really drill down and understand, the reasons behind those.
Stefan, I think the key takeaway there is, tools to be leveraged to help accelerate the process, but the human element is going to remain pivotal as far as we're concerned, and that's consistent with for those who do find themselves looking up Capco on LinkedIn or on our website, we've got a number of articles that talk to that, and examples of hackathons or sessions that we've done with clients where these types of questions have been posed, and that tends to be the conclusion that we have that we've come to. As Stefan said, at this stage, who knows how things will develop in the future. John, to you next. If you could only start with one discipline, this is a good one. If you could only start with one discipline, architecture, analysis, or process to build maturity in an organization, which one would it be and why?
Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to say business analysis, because for me, business analysis entails process as well. So a lot of what we do as BAs is focused around understanding the process, thinking about how it can be improved, how it could be made more excellent, as it were, from a process excellence perspective. So I would definitely combine the two. I think having the expertise within any organisation to understand what it is the business are doing, what they need, but also to explore the solutions that the business need as well, from not just a practical technical perspective, but also from a conceptual and functional perspective as well. Because quite often solutions we work on are not a single tool out of the box. It's quite often a combination of components and tools that need to be designed as part of an integrated solution. And those solutions don't just need to be considered as part of functional architecture, is really what I'm describing, but also explored further in terms of the detailed functional analysis that informs the work the developers do. So I feel like, Johnny, I probably cheated a little bit and said everything business analysis and everything process as part of that. And I'm going to cheat again, because I'm going to say that while we're doing that, we should definitely maintain a business architecture, process excellence, and operational excellence mentality as we do it. But it keeps things interesting anyway.
It's safe to say that with this many BAs, process SMEs, and architects on the call, John, that was the politically correct answer to give.
Absolutely,
so,
yeah.
I'm sure.
Ask me a project management question.
Yeah. Adrien, over to you, please. How do we balance speed and rigor when integrating architecture, analysis, and process in an agile delivery?
First of all, can I say I would have loved to have the other question, because that was a completely different answer than John's answer. Look, great question. I think it's a matter of granularity into design, and that's usually where speed can come to play. if the need is to get to clear, like a quick overview of where we stand, you're naturally gonna kind of lack a little bit of granularity around the details of that design. And that, I think that can be done at every stage. You could through every discipline. Business architecture can provide in a few weeks. We've done it recently for an insurance company. We did a complete overview of service boundary model of what an insurance company, a life and pension insurance company would look like, and that was 2 weeks time. 2 people, 2 weeks, complete overview, but very high level, helicopter view. Plenty of people will have asked, well, what does it mean? What does it tell me? How do you articulate the changes that are required? How do you get to target state? What are the kind of ins and outs of that? And that's where you can always kind of mobilize and play around with that granularity and with the level of detail that you provide. And that's across all of the different disciplines. I think business analysis can do exactly the same thing, and process excellence can probably look at it in the same way. If we want to remain agile, the benefit is usually to kind of combine the 3 disciplines, and that's kind of give you what you need for going from an MVP to something a bit more full-fledged, and ensuring that whatever we built remains aligned to a target state and remains aligned to a North Star, which hopefully business architecture will be able to provide, and tie that back to your strategy and ensuring that there's a kind of end-to-end mapping and linkage between the different things. So yeah, I think my answer is a lot about the granularity level and a lot about ensuring that you have kind of cross-functional teams that allow to work together and provide quick answer, to mobilize your backlog, and then have a bit more time to flesh out what you're going to work through in the future sprints.
And that speaks, I think, more broadly to the maturity probably of the organization that you're working in as well. You talked about, you know, that concept of cross-functional teams, which you might associate more with an agile mindset, and we know that that's not often or not always the case when we land in a client environment or within these larger organizations. So there's a bit of again, taking the stakeholders on the journey that can be valuable there. So the next question relates more to career path, actually, and considering business analysis, business and process excellence, and business architecture. Maybe it's one for you, John. How do we see that developing from a career perspective? You know, perhaps starting out initially from junior business analyst to becoming a fully fledged business architect or enterprise architect with you know, much more rich oversight across the entirety of the organization's business architecture.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, it's a really good question. I think firstly, you know, there is no set or predetermined path that you have to take. You know, so, you know, I can speak my own perspective on this in terms of, you know, there would have been a point back in the day, many years ago, where I thought the career pathway for every business analyst was to become a project manager and then to become a program manager. All right, that's obviously not the case. I've learned that now. And it could be, you know, if within business analysis, you know, you want to progress from that junior BA that you mentioned to a lead BA, to a BA manager, to a head of practice. These are all paths that are open to you, and there's no necessity to step off that business analysis pathway. Equally, you know, if you at different points, and you can go on and off the pathway as well, which should be recognised. If at different points you want to, you know, understand process excellence in a bit more detail or specialise in that area, that's absolutely a career pathway and an avenue open to you, as is business architecture as well. And I think, you know, there'll also be individuals that will entirely step off of the BA path and the process path and the business architecture path and maybe go on to other transformation roles. You know, but there's absolutely no barriers to be moving across the different disciplines. I think the more you move and the more you consider other disciplines and other parts of the career pathway, it sort of informs really that skill set that you might need to be more of a wholesome, holistic BA, really, and knowing your audience. If you've been a project manager, as an example, who better to know what a project manager needs from a business analyst or a business architect? You know, so the good news is, I think there's avenues for everybody depending on your preference. and I think there's a number of levels for each area to give each individual the support they need to work up the ladder. And there's obviously organisations like the IIBA as well who provide the training to enable people to get some of that knowledge and that background to enable them to execute as they go through.
Great answer, John, and it really talks about the value of gaining experience throughout your career and not pigeonholing yourself or siloing yourself into one particular discipline. Final question in the minutes that we've got left before we hand back over to Elaine for closing. Over to you, Stefan. So from a process excellence perspective, we've talked about methodology on this webinar quite a bit. And from a tooling perspective, are there any tools that you would recommend to those on the call for the various activities associated that we've talked about today?
Yeah, I can talk about recent, I guess, organisations that we've worked with, and I've seen variations of similar tools, but some are better than others. I think I'm not associated or sponsored at all by any of these, so this is a personal view only. But for example, worked with a client recently, and they used an enterprise-wide process mapping analysis and repository tool called Signavio, which I think was really powerful, really effective, and it allowed this multi-global firm to provide process maps at a industry level standard, share them across everybody, build in governance processes and approval workflows, but then also link in metadata to risk and controls, for example, or key bottlenecks, key areas of opportunity, and really start to almost from bottom up build their processes into a taxonomy, and then start to really work cross-functionally, looking at end-to-end processes, and without having to switch tools or move on to anything else. So I think that's a really good example of where something that can seem quite small scale, if you looked at by team, it becomes really powerful when everything can join up and align together across an end-to-end across operations or even the firm itself.
Next to the importance of the value of integration, both from a systems perspective, but also organizationally across teams. Very good. Thank you, Stefan. Just finally then, there are a few questions around slides. As Elaine noted, the session has been recorded. So in due course, we'll be making it available on both IIBA and capco.com websites. With all that being said, a big thank you to Stefan, John and Adrien. Thanks for having us to the IIBA. Do give us a follow on LinkedIn, check out the capco.com website, and we really look forward to being back with you guys again in the near future. Thanks, everyone. Over to you, Elaine.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone in the Capco team for a fantastic session. And thanks, everyone who dialed in and shared their thoughts and questions. Keep your eye out for future ones coming up. Sign up to our newsletter, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.